Pokemon can only learn a maximum of 4 moves. It was true when Red and Blue were released in 1996, and it's still true today in 2022. For those of you who don't know me, hello. My name is Wolfe Glick, and I've been competing in official Pokemon tournaments since 2011. You can see some of my accomplishments on screen here. I've been really interested in some of the theory behind what makes Pokemon good or bad. It got me thinking, what would the game be like if Pokemon could learn 5 moves? Pokemon in many ways is a series defined by its rigidity. There's an old adage that if you've played one Pokemon game, you've played them all. And to a certain extent, there is some truth to that. Nearly every main series game features 8 gyms for the player to beat, culminating in an Elite Four and Champion. They're harassed by the local evil team and aided by some of the region's poorly developed characters in their quest to be the strongest 10-year-old in the land. While specific mechanics differ between games, the combat and leveling is very similar no matter which generation you're playing. It's a winning formula, and Game Freak hasn't had a strong incentive to really shake things up. For a series so known for its familiarity, there's actually very few specific mechanics that haven't been tinkered with at one point or another. New types have been added, the type chart has been altered, abilities and hidden abilities were added, Pokemon can hold items, form changes, there's a move with 2 types, superpowered moves, evolution mid-turn, Pokemon get big now, Pokemon fusion, and even, Pokemon fusion? Despite so many aspects of the Pokemon experience being tampered with, there has never been any experimentation with allowing Pokemon to learn an additional move. Now, we can't say for sure why Game Freak hasn't allowed Alakazam to learn an additional move, despite its IQ being over 5,000, but I can at least take some guesses. Game Freak tends to like their new mechanics to look and feel very exciting and flashy. Whether that's huge Z-move animations, vibrant form changes via Mega Evolution, or the visually impressive and conceptually confounding Dynamax, animations that players and spectators notice easily is clearly a priority. The reason for these animations being so noticeable is twofold. First, put simply, it's cool. Sending a wild Bidoof to an early grave with Let's Snuggle Forever is not only hilarious, but it also adds clear and obvious distinction to Generation 7, helping it to stand out and feel a bit more unique in a series full of sameness. Second, these central generational gimmicks are a big part of the promotional materials that go along with the game's release. I remember being so excited for Mega Evolution before Generation 6 came out, and that's in large part because Mega Evolution looked so new and different and exciting. Adding a 5th ordinary move wouldn't meet either of these criteria. The simple expansion of an existing mechanic would have huge implications on competitive play, but also would likely struggle to appear interesting enough to be usable in promotional materials or enticing to players playing through the game. Of course, it's also possible that Game Freak doesn't want to add a 5th move because of what it would do to competitive Pokemon, but something tells me that isn't a priority. Before I tell you what I think, I'm curious to know what the general consensus is. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think allowing Pokemon to learn a 5th move would change competitive Pokemon? Oh, also, please consider subscribing. Only about 9% of my audience is subscribed, so if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you haven't subscribed yet. If you don't want to understand yet, I also understand, and I'll continue to work on upping the quality until you're convinced. Anyway, back to what would happen if Game Freak let Pokemon learn an additional move. I've given it a fair bit of thought, and if you're looking for a short answer to the question, it would be bad. After spending a long time with the question, I have some predictions on what would likely happen from a competitive standpoint. If you're wondering why competitive Pokemon is the focus, it's because a change like this wouldn't impact a casual fan's enjoyment of the game in a meaningful way, in my opinion. Pokemon isn't exactly known for its difficulty, and the addition of a bonus move wouldn't suddenly turn Pokemon into Dark Souls. Also, I'm a competitive player. So, what actually happens when Pokemon can learn a 5th move? Let's start with something that looks like a positive on the surface. When you let Pokemon learn an additional move, all Pokemon will have more moves. This means that you can get your Pokemon to do more things, which in theory sounds fine, right? What's the problem if my Pikachu wants to do an impression of me on New Year's Day and become a better version of itself? There's actually a number of issues by allowing Pokemon to become more versatile in how many things they can do at a time, but let's start with a basic one. Pokemon is in many ways an information game. You don't know what moves your opponent's Pokemon will have until they've revealed them. This might not seem like a big deal at first, but it's one of the aspects that makes Pokemon incredibly difficult to play and what sets it apart from a number of other competitive games. In a game like chess, both players know exactly what moves the other player is capable of. You can't suddenly reveal you've been hiding Queen Blast late into the game. Now, imagine playing chess, but sometimes the pawns take 2 captures to remove, or they can jump over rooks, or maybe they can move 2 spaces forward every couple turns. Until you'd seen what a piece was capable of, you'd need to be considering tons of options that your opponent might not even have access to. In Pokemon, this most often takes the form of coverage moves that are a different type than the user. Most Pokemon in competitive have a standard move pool, featuring moves with their type, defensive moves, and occasionally a popular coverage move to hit Pokemon they're weak to. But the moves they normally run are not their only viable options. Take a Pokemon like Charizard, for example. Charizard almost always runs Protect, a fire move like Heat Wave or Blast Burn, a flying move like Air Slash or Hurricane, and Solar Beam. Protect helps keep it alive, Fire and Flying are its stab types, and Solar Beam lets it hit pesky, water, and rock type Pokemon that threaten it. However, let's say you had a Charizard that really wanted to beat other Charizard. You could, instead of running Solar Beam, run Ancient Power, and KO other Charizard before they knew what hit them. Or, let's say Heatran was a real problem for your team. You could run Scorching Sands and not have to worry about Heatran anymore. This all sounds very exciting from the perspective of the attacker, but now consider you're on the Heatran side, and your opponent has a Charizard. Let's assume 5% of all Charizard use Scorching Sands, and if your opponent has it and you let your Heatran faint, you'll lose the game. What should you do? Should you gamble the game on them not having it and risk the loss, or should you play slow and defensively and potentially waste a really favorable matchup? This guessing game extends to far more than just the moves your opponent has. Items, abilities, and EV spreads are all crucial information that pro players gather throughout the course of a set, in order to make the best possible decisions going forward. And it's not always possible to learn that information before the crucial moments. I have 2 examples to share with you from the 2019 season, the last full season we had. It's round 7 of the World Championships, and the winner will advance to the final bracket while the loser will be eliminated. I'm down a game, but in a good position to win game 2. My Rayquaza has an attack boost, and is positioned where it can likely KO the rest of my opponent's Pokemon, but it's the last offense I have on my team. I knock out my opponent's Incineroar, leaving them with only Groudon on the field and Venusaur in the back. But
otherwise it must be over.
No! What?
Are you kidding me?
He's dead. What?
Is that gonna knock out with the Midas Teeth?
Yes!
Oh my god, it does!
What?
Oh.
That Groudon has something to hit that Rayquaza anyways with the dragon.
in this scenario, I couldn't afford to slow the pace of the game down, or I'd likely lose if my opponent didn't have Dragon Claw Groudon. And yet, since they had it, I lost my Rayquaza and was eliminated from the tournament. Dragon Claw Groudon was very uncommon at the time, but it was my undoing here. Let's look at a similar scenario from the North American International Championships. It's the 14th round of the tournament, and once again, the winner will advance to the final 8 bracket, while the loser will be eliminated. I find myself in a really awkward position against my opponent's Amoonguss. My electric terrain has expired, meaning all my Pokemon are vulnerable to falling asleep, and I can't get rid of the Amoonguss before it makes me take a nap. My opponent goes for what they think is a safe spore into Tapu Koko, but
my Kyogre. The Volt Switch, though, going to find its mark onto the Amoonguss, still not doing very much because of that weakened power.
Important to allow for it to fall asleep, but we know that it has access to Wide Guard. And oh, the safety goggles!
That's a spicy item to have on the Incineroar.
if Incineroar falls asleep here, I'm very likely to lose the game. Now, safety goggles isn't the most unusual item on Incineroar, but there's a bit of extra context that's relevant. This team was used by both myself and my good friend Aaron Trailer. We both made it to day 2, and I went on to win the entire tournament. In the over 60 games we played combined, the moment you just watched is the only time throughout the entire tournament that this item activated. Most of my opponents assumed that Incineroar held a Z Crystal, as that was the most common item at the time. In other words, even if my opponent had talked to every other person that both Aaron and I had played throughout the tournament, they still couldn't have known that Incineroar held safety goggles. Was it correct for them to not Spore in order to cover such a niche option, even though not accounting for it ended up costing them the game? It's a really hard question to answer. I know that was a very long tangent, but hopefully it wasn't boring. The point I want to emphasize to you is that the more moves you allow a Pokemon to have at a time, the more this guessing game gets worse. With more total move slots, you're able to cover wider swaths of enemy teams with fewer Pokemon, and you can afford to run more obscure moves for specific matchups. This would lead to defensive Pokemon becoming worse overall, with offensive Pokemon becoming better. Defensive Pokemon typically shine due to their staying power, which most of the time takes the form of good natural defensive stats coupled with solid defensive typing, allowing them to resist popular attacks. With more moves on each Pokemon, the odds of a Pokemon being hit with a super effective attack skyrocket, making it much harder for Pokemon to survive. On the flip side, Pokemon with strong natural offensive stats become even stronger. If you're a singles player, you might think that more offense is a good thing, but in my opinion, it can make the game really not fun. There have been rule sets within competitive Pokemon where the defensive Pokemon couldn't keep up with the offensive ones, and what it led to was an extremely volatile way of playing the game. Matches could be decided in an instant, and a single miss or bad turn might immediately cost you the game. I think Pokemon is the most fun to play when you need a mix between defense and offense. Solid defense allows you to position well and gives you some insurance against a single bad turn, and making sure you have enough damage output ensures games don't turn into a grindy stall war. With a fifth move, I fear we would end up in a situation where the defensive Pokemon simply couldn't keep up with the offensive ones. The one exception to defensive Pokemon becoming worse are that some support Pokemon might become better. The role of support Pokemon is to enable their partners rather than to sponge lots of incoming damage. They typically use moves like Follow Me or Fake Out, or can disrupt the opponent with status conditions or screens. With an extra move slot, these Pokemon might become even more annoying. One example is Togekiss, who, for a while in 2020, was the premier support Pokemon. Togekiss usually runs Follow Me, Air Slash, and then 2 of Dazzling Gleam, Protect, and Yawn. With an extra move slot, Togekiss could use all 3, or it could even run moves like Ally Switch, Safeguard, or Thunder Wave, allowing players to tailor their Egg Bird to be as annoying as possible for their specific team. As a small note, one other thing to think about when talking about a 5th move slot is that it would be extremely problematic with Dynamax. Dynamax not only significantly raises the power of moves, it also adds a powerful secondary effect to them. With 5 Dynamax moves, offensive Pokemon would be a nightmare to deal with, as you'd have to contend with both their coverage and secondary effects being increased. I don't think this is a huge deal though, because obviously Pokemon isn't going to make any changes to Sword and Shield, and I don't personally think it's likely that Dynamax continues into Generation 9, if that's even a thing. If you've listened to everything I've said so far and still think having an additional move wouldn't be so bad, I have bad news for you. I've saved the most impactful point for last. To best explain my point, we have to look back a few years to before Sword and Shield released, where, for the first and only time in history, Pokemon fans were mad. Game Freak announced that they wouldn't be adding every Pokemon to Sword and Shield, and fans were pissed. Things got pretty ugly, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. Why were people so upset that not all the Pokemon were going to be in Sword and Shield? I think a big part of it was sentimental value. A lot of the fans who were upset wanted to transfer Pokemon over or catch Pokemon that they liked or had some connection with. A smaller part of it, though, was the idea of diversity. Pokemon has over 1,000 different creatures, and there's this idea that every Pokemon should be special and should be able to be used. This mentality bleeds over heavily into competitive Pokemon, where casual viewers love to complain about how every team uses the same Pokemon. Counterintuitively, the more Pokemon are allowed in a rule set, the less Pokemon are used. This might seem strange at first. After all, why would players choose to use less Pokemon when more are legal? One reason is because of opportunity cost. When Sword and Shield first came out, there were a couple hundred Pokemon that were legal, and yet it was one of the most diverse competitive formats we've ever seen. I was playing against weird Pokemon even in the top cut of regionals, and it really felt like almost anything could be viable. The reason is because the power level of the format was lower. If you wanted to use, say, Toxtricity, you weren't going to be that much worse off than if you were using the best electric type available to you, say, Rotom. Currently, if you wanted to use Toxtricity, the best electric type would be Regieleki, and there is an enormous difference in the viability of those two Pokemon. In other words, the opportunity cost of using a Pokemon like Toxtricity is higher the more Pokemon are legal. And though Toxtricity does have some niches and things that set it apart from Regieleki, those niches become less valuable the stronger the opponent's Pokemon get. The power level of a format being higher also makes it much harder for any Pokemon that aren't the absolute strongest to shine. People love to look at how Pachirisu was a shining example of a player using an unorthodox Pokemon to do well, but Pachirisu did well in a format with very few Pokemon available. And though players have used it since in more open formats, it's never had anywhere close to the same level of success. Pokemon like Urshifu, Incineroar, Landorus T, Rillaboom, and Regieleki make any Pokemon that doesn't have something extremely powerful going for it very difficult to use. In my opinion, Regieleki alone invalidates about 85% of all possible Pokemon because of its ridiculous speed in conjunction with Electroweb. So, when more Pokemon are legal, you not only have to contend with the opportunity cost of using a weaker Pokemon, but also you have to deal with stronger Pokemon overall. In other words, the rich get richer. I've told you all of this because it's the exact same concept if you were to allow Pokemon to have a 5th move. In my opinion, adding a 5th move to all Pokemon would disproportionately favor those Pokemon that were already at the top, and make Pokemon that were already struggling even more difficult to use. Let's take a look at some examples to see why. Landorus T is probably the mascot for competitive Pokemon at this point. It's well known, widely hated, and overpowered. It pairs phenomenal offensive typing with a sky-high attack stat, a wide move pool, and good defensive stats. At present, most Landorus run a set of Swords Dance, Rock Slide, Fly, and Earthquake, and hold the Lumberry item. If you ignore Landorus or try and play too defensively, you risk it Swords Dancing and becoming a huge threat. But if you attack it recklessly, you might eat a powerful max move. Landorus's primary max moves in Flying and Ground raise its speed and special defense, giving it the option to either make its team faster or increase staying power. At the moment, unless you have a really powerful ice move, the best way to deal with Landorus is to either bait it into Dynamaxing early and then lowering its damage output with Intimidate or Reflect, or to outlast its Dynamax and then deal with it in its Babby form. With the addition of a 5th move, Landorus could run more coverage moves like U-Turn or Superpower, but it also could run the move Protect. Having both Protect and Swords Dance would make it way harder to bait Landorus into Dynamaxing early, and would also make it harder to cleanly KO once its Dynamax expired. In other words, adding a 5th move would allow Landorus to neatly cover its few weaknesses, making it even harder to take down. Incineroar is another Pokemon that we need to talk about here. Incineroar is probably the single best Pokemon in the game. While it isn't going to sweep teams, it has ridiculous supporting options thanks to Fake Out, Intimidate, Parting Shot, and good defensive typing. Most Incineroar sets run Fake Out and Parting Shot, and then pick 2 out of 3 of Flare Blitz, Darkest Lariat, and Taunt. Having access to both stab moves in addition to Taunt allows Incineroar to be even more versatile, but that isn't the only set it would have to run. Incineroar could opt to run Will-O-Wisp or Burning Jealousy in addition to Taunt for multiple modes of disruption, or it could lean into an Assault Vest set with Fake Out, U-Turn, Flare Blitz, Darkest Lariat, and Close Combat as a hybrid supporter and attacker. Incineroar is similar to Regieleki in that it invalidates a lot of Pokemon due to how powerful it is as a supportive Pokemon, and giving it better tools to support its team only makes it harder for other Pokemon to make a statement. We can't speak of the best Pokemon without talking about the strongest too, right? Zacian is the single strongest Pokemon in the game at present, and it isn't even remotely balanced. Right now, Zacian always runs Protect, Behemoth Blade, Sacred Sword, and then is forced to choose between Play Rough to let it hit some problem Pokemon harder like Kyogre and Palkia, or Substitute, which is a very powerful defensive tool that's useful across matchups. Letting Zacian do both would allow it to not only have one of the most broken moves in the game, but also the offensive coverage to make it virtually impossible to switch into safely, and a safe defensive tool that can quickly snowball out of control. If you're having trouble understanding why these moves are more impactful on Pokemon like Zacian or Landorus than on a weaker Pokemon like, say, Arcanine, think about it this way. If you wanted to run Arcanine right now, you would run its 4 best moves, whatever those are. And yet, that wouldn't be enough to let it perform well. So it's very unlikely that the 5th best move on a Pokemon that already isn't up to par is going to be the deciding factor in allowing it to shine. On the other hand though, for Pokemon that are already naturally stronger than other Pokemon in the format, their 5th best move might help them to beat even more Pokemon, or to improve the few matchups they struggle with. And if you're mad at Incineroar and Landorus, this would still happen even without them. In any given format, some Pokemon will be better than others. Granted, some of the Pokemon currently legal are way too strong. It's fine for some Pokemon to be above average, but Pokemon like Zacian, Incineroar, Landorus, Regieleki, Rillaboom, and Urshifu are far too good compared to what else is legal. I personally hope that none of these Pokemon make it into whatever the next Pokemon games are without serious nerfs. So, Game Freak really shouldn't allow Pokemon to learn a 5th move, in my opinion. I do think what's interesting though is that, in some ways, they already have. Z moves were probably Game Freak's attempt at allowing Pokemon to push back that 4-move barrier. Z moves are unique to Generation 7, and they were ridiculously powerful once per battle moves that could only be used if your Pokemon forfeited its item slot. It was an interesting concept, but in my opinion, the execution was poor. Because the moves were only used once per battle, getting it right felt like a major guessing game, as attacking into a Protect or a Resistance or Immunity could be a massive swing, and you wouldn't even know if a Pokemon had a Z move until after it had used it. While I hated Z moves when we were playing with them, I do think that the idea had potential. Allowing a Pokemon to learn a 5th move at the cost of their item slot is really cool in theory, but just so difficult to balance in practice. Game Freak clearly isn't done experimenting with changes to moves. In Sword and Shield, Dynamax technically allows a Pokemon to double the amount of moves it has access to, if you count max moves as different moves than their base moves. The reason this isn't overwhelming in competitive Pokemon is because these moves don't increase the coverage of the user, and because Dynamax allows a Pokemon to double its HP as well, giving players a defensive and reactionary tool to handle the increased power. To me, Dynamax feels like Game Freak trying to better balance Z moves by tuning down the power of the moves and adding a defensive component. I could be totally off base on that though, it's just a hunch. More recently, we see Game Freak experimenting with another way of letting players get more diversity out of their moves, with Legends Arceus introducing the strong and agile styles for Pokemon moves. While the Legends Arceus combat system is very different than a traditional Pokemon game, I do think it's interesting that the moves are what the game's gimmick revolves around, and to me, implies Game Freak might continue experimenting with making moves more dynamic. I would be interested to think about what would happen if Agile and Strong Style were adapted for a traditional Pokemon game, with Agile decreasing power and increasing accuracy, and Strong increasing power and decreasing accuracy. I seriously doubt it's going to happen, but it would be interesting from a competitive standpoint. This was a really fun video to work on, so I hope you enjoyed. If you have any feedback on how I approached this video, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I know I went on more tangents than normal, so I'd be curious if you think that enhanced or distracted from my points. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.